Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's Vogue, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hey guys, it's Joe. I'm just coming in to say that today's episode has a special guest, Zack's friend and another cast member from the BBC show The Traitors, Jonny Holloway. Jonny served for the British Army during Afghanistan, and he graciously offered to help us tell the story of the war, and from a veteran's perspective. In 2014, his regiment was ambushed by the Taliban during a mission which resulted in life-changing injuries. Jonny spoke very openly about his experiences in the war, including on the day of that ambush. So, just be aware this podcast will include some of those details. Apart from that, enjoy. Hi there, and welcome to the Pint-Sized History podcast. I'm Joe.
I'm Zack.
And I can't believe it, but I'm flanked by not just one, but two hit stars from the show Traitors in front of me. Look, it's Jonny and Zack.
Oh!
Unbelievable. How you doing?
That's
Jonny.
actually right back to the show, that does.
Does it?
Yeah,
What?
yeah.
What, hearing our names together?
No, just like the way you read it as like such a professional broadcaster there.
Nah,
I'm talking not one, but two Traitors.
Part of the job,
I
man.
did feel some movements down there, listening to it.
Well, look, I'm just trying my best. But more, let's not. Why the fuck are we talking about me? Let's talk about Jonny.
What a
You
lovely
good?
haircut he had.
Very pale though.
Yeah, fuck me.
I think it might be the lighting.
I'm
don't
tan.
worry
I'm
about it.
literally the
It's not
same
the
colour
light.
as the t-shirt. It's not the light.
This has just turned into a rope.
Yeah. Well,
we
I'm
are
on my
roasting
own.
here.
Jonny, come here. Yeah, how are you, mate? You good?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. I was just walking past and I thought, oh, look, there's Zack over there. And I
Bumped you up on
here
the
I
road.
am. What am I doing here?
Completely impromptu.
I normally hide away from everyone, but here I am, you got me.
We're locked out there. Zach, what are we chatting about today?
Well, we're chatting about Afghanistan today, which kind of checks out considering we have someone that served there.
Wow. What are the
And,
chances?
You know, as you know, during the Pint-Sized History podcast, we do have a little bit of a drink. And today I'll be drinking a Tiny Rebel Electric Boogaloo.
Mate, we have been so conservative chill with our lager choices so far, like Birra Moretti's and suddenly you've just pumped out with that.
I'm looking for sponsorships.
Is that
Tiny
why?
Rebel.
Zack, what is it?
It is a passion fruit IPA, but it calls itself Lil Nipper.
Oh, hang on, let's see it.
What does that say?
I thought it was like
Nipper.
the little nipper for a second, but no,
And
it
Stone
is
Cold.
Nipper.
Have you tried that before?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I got it on one of the Beer 52 things. I like beers, and
I like it.
I'm hard. And I remember this one either being really good or fairly shit. So I'm about to find out. That's
sounded
cold.
nice.
That wasn't it?
Taste test.
Refreshing.
Fantastic.
Not too cold.
Lovely. I've just got a Cobra person.
Just
It's
got-
it's lovely.
Night and
Cheers.
day. The way that we're going to do this podcast is we're going to briefly explain the lead up to the Afghanistan war and also, the how it kind of went down, the very broad notes, but we want to do that quickly because Jonny's here. We want to talk to you. We want to get all your insights about how it was, what it was like, the entire war from your point of view. So that's the goal is we're going to try and get through this first bit quickly and just dive right in.
So we'll go straight into it. Do you know why it's called Afghanistan?
Because it's home to the Afghanis.
This guy. Every time I ask him a question, he was fucking spot on.
That's
with
right,
it.
right? That is
It
correct.
is, yeah. The place or the home of the Afghans.
I can actually speak some Pashto.
Can
Well,
you?
well,
Oh,
fucking-
mate, you've got to
fucking do
that's
it.
it.
So one of the main ones I remember, this gets juicy actually. One of the main ones I remember is, quite simply, what do you think it means? Dresh!
Stop.
Stop.
Well done.
The hand was a bit of a giveaway there.
Well, exactly. It's all about body language, you see. If you can't quite pronounce a word properly and you want someone to stop, you go, what did you say? Like, you know what I mean? I also learned how to say, look at me, I'm not a lady.
Go on then.
Do you know why I learned to say that? So I used to do a really good King Julian accent back in the day. Like, I got
Madagascar.
a gecko on my head, and he says, look at me, I'm a lady. Right? Yeah. So my mate that was really fluent in Pashto, I said to him, can you teach me this? He was like, why? And I was like, no, not like that. It'd be funny, wouldn't it? And he was like, all right, whatever. And it is.
In the middle of a war zone.
Yeah,
It'd be
not,
funny,
mate?
innit?
Yeah. And I remember I went up to my Afghan interpreter, I went, Matagari, Zio Shatsium. And he was like, ah! It was the funniest thing. Like, yeah. So, yeah, you got to learn a little bit of the language. It's
That's
important.
quality.
Maybe some relevant stuff.
So I guess, yeah, I'd never really thought about that, but I guess it is important to at least have some very basic stuff down, even just like something like stop.
In the past, Afghanistan's been invaded a lot. It's led to the name.
That's true.
The Graveyard of Empires. It's kind of misleading because Afghanistan's not been the reason why these empires have fallen or torn themselves apart. But typically, when big nations and big powers go there, it doesn't end well. That's because it's like a super horrible landscape. Well, lovely landscape, looks great,
Beautiful
but like
country.
to fight in and stage a war in, pretty shit. It's got really rugged mountainous landscapes, deserts, really harsh and severe winters, which just make, I guess, the entire experience of going in there and trying to fight the locals there a really, really horrible time.
You're absolutely right. It can be quite barren in certain places of Afghanistan, but I thought the country itself was beautiful. The only thing that was wrong with it was the traces of human and carnage, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The smell. When I think of Afghanistan, I can smell rotten meat, I can smell veg that's been out in the... And that kind of smell sticks with you. But I remember thinking the country itself was beautiful sunsets, beautiful skies. But then you look down and you just saw rubbish and in certain areas,
Torn apart by
but
war and...
yeah, and it is such a shame to see because as a whole, the actual country itself is beautiful.
In the late 1970s, the PDPA are essentially they tried to start a really radically modern set of policies for Afghanistan. They try and turn it into like a communist state, try and take it away from the traditional principles of like Islamism, and this obviously angers a lot of the radical Islamist people that live there, and they start a rebellion, and this kicks off in like 24 out of 28 provinces in Afghanistan. And then the Soviets come in and try and quell that. And this leads to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which is fucking brutal.
What year was that?
So the Soviets invaded in 1979, I believe.
Yeah.
And this led to the forming of like what's really famous known as the Mujahideen, which is like the factions of Israel.
The factions of Israel.
It's the factions of Islamic fundamentalists that basically fight back the Russians. And here's where it gets really juicy. They're funded by the CIA.
Yeah.
And the Saudi Arabians and the Pakistanis and the UK. And this essentially bolsters them into quite like a strong movement. And come the end of the war in 1989, when the Soviets leave Afghanistan, because it's been a terrible situation for them, they've basically been completely battered and bruised
Country's been through a lot.
Humiliated and embarrassed by this basically group of tribal militias. In 1992, the Taliban rise to power, they seize power, and in 1995, it's essentially the growth of the Taliban as a militia organisation is kind of cemented.
So that's when the Taliban are born, essentially.
Yeah, 1992, yeah. And they kind of they take the advantage of the fact that there's warring factions. They rise to power as the biggest faction of them all. Around this time, 1988, I think it is, Al Qaeda's formed, and that's obviously sets the tone for what happens post 2001. That was the faction that Osama bin Laden founded, and Osama bin Laden who eventually, did 9/11. He wasn't a very good man. And there's a kind of period after the Soviet invasion where the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda turn their eyes away from Soviet Russia and towards America as their focus, because they see America as sort of like an obstacle for Islam in Afghanistan and Islam in the Middle East as well. So they bomb 2 embassies in Kenya and I think Tanzania, because obviously they're putting terrorist operations on around the globe at this point, I guess, mainly in Africa and the Middle East. The US bomb Afghanistan and Syria with cruise missile strikes, and then Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda retaliate with 2001.
It's already such a mess before the big event, the one that cooks it all, which is what we all know as 9/11.
So obviously we mentioned Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. They're different parties. Taliban is essentially the governing body of Afghanistan. They are also an armed militia as well, so they're both political and a military power. They're pretty big at this point in time in like the late 1990s, about like I think 40,000 men. And Al-Qaeda is obviously the Islamic terrorist group. So they're basically being funded and hidden and trained by the Taliban in Afghanistan, but they are separate entities.
Always never knew the difference between the two of them until I became an adult and started researching this stuff properly. And before that, I really didn't know, like, so who's the Taliban? Who's Al Qaeda? They're not the same thing.
Bloody confusing.
It really can.
It really. There's so many different organisations, good and bad. So it's.
And one thing I learned while researching this is that they actually just did not get along at all. Obviously, they didn't get along historically, but during the war, they were often at odds with each other. 9/11 happens. Now, this leads to the War on Terror and the invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001. So only 1 month after 9/11 is the first troops on the ground and the first attacks being shot from, I think it was bombing runs from the UK and US. It was actually just the UK and US that attacked at the very beginning. Then other coalition allies joined in the fighting. The Americans knew they were going to retaliate in some fashion. But George Bush actually, before they agreed to a certain retaliation, they said that at least let's try to demand that they give bin Laden to the Americans. So George Bush actually demanded literally an ultimatum to the Taliban to extradite him and bring him to the US. The Taliban refused to do so, their reasoning being that the United States needed to provide some sort of evidence that bin Laden was at fault. In reality, what actually happened was Afghani religious scholars met in Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, and they were there to discuss demands. Most of them, or at least many, agreed to give bin Laden over. But the leader and also the founder of the Taliban, Mullah Muhammad Omar, refused, believing a few things. Firstly, that it would be disgrace to the Taliban and also to Islamic thought if it would happen. That the USA would continue to make demands if we gave them over if they gave them over anyway, they would continue to demand more and more anyway.
You give the Americans an inch, I'll take a mile.
Exactly. And finally, that they actually underestimated. They thought it was unlikely that the Americans would go to war, at least at the beginning. They really weren't that. They thought that the Americans would try everything before they actually invaded. In reality, 1 month later,
so raw. They're straight in.
If I could sum up the American forces, it would be Top Gun. Like, just imagine that, like, early days, like, dang, 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 dang. It's very, like, yeah. They
love it. They love it.
Hats off to them, but there was a few times they got us in trouble because they might have been a bit trigger happy here and there.
I did want to talk about that. The different nations you might have fought with, the different points. Like, how were they different? How were the Americans any different?
Well, I think the British had a completely different approach to most forces that went into Afghanistan. Like we spoke about earlier, you had the Russians that went in guns blazing, they lost. Because one thing I did at a very young age, as you naturally do, is underestimate your enemy. How I thought the Taliban would be is not how they were. These guys...
firing at the hip, like missing targets and
shit. You would think so, but when you see elite soldiers out there, these guys have been training since they're like 7 years old. They've been brainwashed into it, their families have been in it, they've been grown into it. And these are the most epic fighters. Like, they use the land to their ability as well. Right. If there's a sunset coming, we're all being blinded. Where do you think their firing positions are going to be? With the sunset behind them. They're clever. They'll wait for helicopters to come in. And, like, so I think we all had very different approaches on how we went. And the British, and very much our role was drilled into us as a British soldier, was hearts and minds. We're going in to help, not to destroy. The only time we ever fired our weapon, essentially, was if someone was shooting at us first. It was self-defense. And not many people realise that.
Obviously, at the beginning of the fighting, we wanted to get rid of the Taliban. That was the goal. It was to essentially get the big leaders and take over the country, at least for the beginning. Then we can figure out what to do afterwards, but that was the beginning. So, very early on in the fighting, most of northern Afghanistan and Kabul itself was taken, I believe, within 2 or so months of the invasion actually happening. So it went quickly. And suddenly, this coalition is now in charge of the majority of Afghanistan, including the capital. Then, as time goes on, it becomes harder and harder to figure out what your cause is. Osama bin Laden's run off to Pakistan, as has a lot of the leaders of the Taliban. Now, one thing that's interesting is that Pakistan was essentially... Even though they were pretending they weren't involved that much, they were actually not only housing a lot of the Al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders, but also giving them the chance to reorganize, rebuild. And even though the Taliban really struggled at the beginning, they were able to essentially, repair their force up to a decent fighting standard. And by the time it reached 2005, there were a lot more missions, and it became a lot more of a dangerous job.
They were producing like nightly letters and documents that were going out around, like promoting their cause. They were going like to friends and relatives' houses, trying to get them to join the cause, and then telling them to tell their family to join the cause.
But at that point, from the coalition's perspective, it suddenly becomes a lot more difficult to figure out why exactly you're there. essentially became twofold: to try and find and target and capture as many leaders, Al Qaeda leaders and Taliban leaders as they could, and strongholds that they still had remaining, and also to maintain the peace, maintain the order until they can eventually nation build and create a sort of functioning democracy with American values. And that was essentially became the goal over the next few years as they kind of soul search for why are that we in this country, why are we trying to do what we do.
And that's why I admire, especially from what I know from the British Army and what we've done, is we went into, rather than we can't fix this, people have tried to fix this. So we're going with the approach, we're going to train the Afghan army, which we did very well. I personally have lost a friend where there's a case of that going wrong. But whereas, we work with the Afghan army, and you probably remember back in the news and that you had it where they turn around and start shooting at us. They were Taliban in disguise, but often that wasn't the case. The case was their family members had been kidnapped or something like that, and they say, if you don't go and shoot at these British troops, we're going to kill all your family. And it's a suicide mission, because as soon as they turn around and start shooting at us, retaliation, and we've seen it go wrong horrendously, and that's hard to do. You're out there to train these guys and they start shooting at you, so from that perspective it's hard. But the Afghan police, and that's what I admire about what I have witnessed from Afghanistan, because we went in with that, but we fought outside of the box and thought we're gonna, and they done so well. You could see the difference in early tours of Afghanistan to the end of Afghanistan, where the Afghan police and the Afghan army didn't have a Scoobies, what they were doing, and you see him cutting around how we hold rifles, and we're instilling that drill, and we were getting somewhere with it. But unfortunately, we all know what happened in the end.
We're at the point now where it's maintaining the peace, trying to train these soldiers, get them ready for one day when the British and the Americans and all the other coalition forces leave. That's the point we're getting to when you arrive. So now let's just forget about all that. Let's talk about you. I'll tell you what, I've got a question for you. When was the last time that you two saw each other?
In my dreams.
Every night. I think about you often.
No, but I mean physically.
Well, I mean, what he's saying is real. Have you noticed his Jonny Holloway starter kit?
You know what? I was wondering where that's come from.
He saw me and he was like, Johnny, you're an inspiration to me. I'm going to grow a tash.
He said this outside, and he's come in and said it again on camera.
I knew there was a reason for it.
No, it's because, it's a bit, elegant and sophisticated. It's a bit nice.
Johnny's got a straight one. I'm going to make sure mine's a handlebar tash.
You're jealous. That's jealousy. I can hear it. It's slipping through.
I'm going to wear some circular glasses next week.
Next week? Back here. It's fat chance.
I think we last saw each other probably at the...
Traitors Retreat.
No. What was you at that I was at recently, and you was sweating and I was laughing at you?
What the fuck is that?
Tough Mudder.
Tough Mudder. Oh, of course.
He's the one with the brain injury.
He's actually had you there. Yeah. So it was 2009 when you joined the army.
That's right.
So I imagine that it was basic training that you began with for the next 3 years or so if you were deploying.
Yeah. So in the build up to that, when
you were 16, sorry.
I was 17.
Okay, in 2009, okay.
I think I did a year in public services, and then I went...
Okay.
And my mum was like, rather than just joining the army, she didn't want me to join the army. She hated the thought of me joining the army.
As you'd imagine all parents would, right?
Yeah, and your dad?
Yeah, my dad, he didn't vocalise it as much, but I remember him saying to me once, he said, John, don't want you to join the army, but if you do, I'll support you. And that was lovely.
That's really nice, of course. That's lovely.
That's right, I don't feel anything.
Flick the single tear he's ever shed away.
You go in 2009. Where is it? Where do you do basic training?
Yeah, so fundamentally, before you join the army, I wanted to join the army, but it's not as simple as, okay, join the army then. There's different regiments to join, and
of course.
I had to learn about all these different things. I just wanted to go, send me out there, right to the front, and they're like, right, let's calm
I'll take
down.
them all on.
All right, you little whippersnapper.
Let's chill out.
So, and I was explained about trades you can do in the army and things like that. And what appealed to me was the cavalry, because it was that essence of you've got armoured vehicles. And I was in a reconnaissance regiment.
Just cavalry, just for those who don't know what it is, like typically the motor ride, it was horseback. But now it's like motorised and mechanised
So
units, right?
my regiment is the Royal Lancers. Back in the day, we would have been on horses with
a
lancers
fucking
going, "Oh God, yeah!"
Give him steel!
I wish. Why didn't we just do that in Afghanistan?
yeah,
Mate,
jeez.
can you imagine a bunch of horses coming at you, like with lancers, like a bunch of angry
they
English?
did that. They did that. So when the
Yeah, why
Americans...
would we stop that?
when the Americans first invaded Afghanistan in 2001, they were in Mazar-e Sharif.
Yeah.
They were in like the deserts around there with the Northern Alliance, and the CIA were literally on horseback, like going across the deserts as they reach objectives to objectives on horses with like fucking
You'd
M4s.
feel so cool, wouldn't
Have
you?
you never seen,
You'd feel
like-
like such a boss
have
if
you
you're
never
on a
seen-
camel in the
That-
middle
what's
of
the
the
film?
desert.
What's the
The
film?
best I got is I bought a bike from a local Afghan village, and the lads always used to take a mickey out of me. I think they destroyed it in the end. Actually, it's not very kind. Actually.
No.
Anyway,
But I'd be riding around with my all kitted up and just like. I wish I had a picture of it, but I don't.
That's a
So,
shame.
yeah.
You decide to join the Lancers, right? The cavalry, and that essentially means that you're now in the armored tank divisions, that kind of stuff. That's like the kind of that's where you'll be placed.
Yeah, so what appealed to me about that regiment is you've got the heavy armoured guys that are known as tankies, and then you've got the cavalry. You've got many different regiments. Our regiment was formation reconnaissance, and that really appealed to me because that's essentially you gather information about the enemy. I was in the army for a while. I managed to get myself on some courses. I remember getting myself on some radio courses as well. And I remember the only reason I did that, I was based in Germany. And they were like, there's a 6-week course coming up in Dorset, if anyone. I'm like, I had a girlfriend at the time. I'm like, oh, mate, send me back to the UK. And I was like, yeah, what a great idea. So I got these courses and I got promoted to Lance Corporal. I went through the ranks quite quickly, done loads of training for Afghanistan. All it was instilled with us, Afghan. We knew exactly what we were training for. But what was beautiful about it is, although it was very action heavy in terms of training, like there wasn't much rest even when I was back because we knew we had upcoming operations coming up essentially. But what was beautiful, I still managed to do skiing, paragliding, and all that cool stuff as well. So the army does open up all these wonderful opportunities, even when we're in the brink of operations happening. So it was quite a beautiful balance.
But also, like, being part of the British Army, it's, you know, the British Army is a big army. It's an organised powerhouse. So, like, you should be able to, you know, if you imagine you're someone that's never been outside the UK, you would need to be able to have these experiences, even if it's a friendly country like Germany, to be able to just see a different culture.
We need a way to detox. We've got so much going on,
Of course.
and we're away from our families, and it becomes a very strong drinking culture. And what does drink lead to?
Yeah, problems.
And what does a bunch of trained angry soldiers and alcohol lead to? So we had to learn a lot of self-discipline ourselves.
yeah.
And that's why I think that, you know, I very much now live by the Army core values. Do you know any of the Army core values?
I don't.
Oh, do you know any of the Army core values?
No, I'm
So
excited
I
to
was
know.
taught it. Sea drills, let's say the core values of the British Army is courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty, selfless commitment. And I think they're a pretty good, solid foundation of values to have. And I think that's why the Army works, because we're all trained the same. We all feel that, like, my lads who I serve with, they are my family. They are my brothers. And like, I know that seems so like cliche, but it is like that because you are raised by your parents and then you go through this massive change in life in the military. They break you down to the point where I remember like I was like at my lowest I've ever felt in my life. But then they started to build us back up again. And they raised us to what we need to be as soldiers with a good balance.
And some of those lads you're talking about are the people behind you. We haven't actually spoken about the picture that we've got here.
That's what makes the British Army in particular work, is because we're brothers. We have all been brought up by the same parents, and those parents are the British Army. And it does
It's like
feel
a fucking
like
propaganda hour, isn't it? I want to go fucking
But
fight.
what he's saying, but it doesn't. It's not about the politics.
No,
though.
I know.
It's purely like
Yeah.
it's the brotherhood that, you know, when you're and this is something that we learned by researching history, is this kind of togetherness, the brotherhood of an army
Yeah.
is so crucial, because if you're fighting on a front line, you forget about everything else that's happening. You don't care about defeating the Nazis and restoring peace worldwide. You care about the
next to
person
you.
next to you.
Look at the person on your left, look at the person
And
on
when
your
you
right.
want to protect them and you want to make sure they
That
survive.
is because
Let's
that is
sign
the
up.
real moment of war. That's a real moment of war, is your
Right.
young friend. And I was a young Lance Corporal with young lads that had never been to Afghanistan before. And I was a line manager, essentially. I was in charge of them. I could take young guys into battle. And I was only, 21 myself? And I'm taking...
responsibility.
Yeah, at such a young age.
And that's not like uncommon. That happens all the time.
No.
Especially when there's major world wars where people are dying so quickly that they need these replacements to come in at such a young age. It's so incredible that the responsibility that sometimes teenagers end up having.
Do you know what scares me a little bit? Is at that time, go back to 2013, I'd already been in the army quite a long time in my head. I felt so grown up. I felt I was an adult. Like I was so but now I'm 32 this week. We just said this earlier. Now I'm 32 this week. It made me realise. It made me realise that I wasn't grown up at all.
For those of you who don't know Johnny has a new job and a new fucking hobby every week. He texted me the other day being like, I fucking love quantum physics.
I do. I absolutely... Ask me a question.
You've also been a teacher as well.
Yeah. So, I taught for about 3 or 4 years.
Anything else?
Barber, did a bit of mechanics, did... physical training instructor.
You were a PT, yeah.
Anything I want to do, I can do it. That's how I believe. That's you could see that as a bad thing.
I'm the opposite.
It works
I can't
for me.
do shit.
But I had the opportunity to be an elephant keeper.
An elephant keeper?
Yeah. I had no experience. I was like, I was in the army. I lost my leg, got blown up. They're like, we'll have you.
So wait, did you actually do it?
No, I thought this is getting ridiculous.
Give me the lions instead. Elephants are old school.
But we joke and we laugh.
Being a mechanic is one thing. Being an elephant keeper.
We joke and we laugh. This is a significant pattern within veterans that have left the military. Do you know why? It's because we're lost, man. When you're in the military, it's such a...
That was profoundly
I know,
deep.
it was very deep.
Fuck?
But it's true. It's so true.
No,
because,
you're right.
and especially in my experience, the army was taken away from me overnight. I didn't think of leaving. It was just, poof, gone. And then I'm like, I don't know what I want to do anymore. I don't know where I am. All the things that I would have done, so army, police, fire, all those things kind of similar in that public service industry. All my plan A, plan B, plan C, gone overnight. And I was lost, didn't know what to do. But I have always...
Sorry you went through that.
Mate, don't bother me. It's a part of...
That's part of the job, mate.
Navigate the office. I wouldn't change anything that's ever happened to me. Even if I knew what was going to happen to me and the outcome of what would happen when I go to Afghanistan, I wouldn't change it. I would do it all again because I've learned so much and I've experienced so much in life that I genuinely value and appreciate and has changed me as a person drastically in such good ways.
There's a few questions we want to ask about your actual experience out there. I do before we get into that nitty-gritty, I do just want to ask the first day that you arrive in Afghanistan, what was it like? Like, what you must have flown off,
searing heat,
and you've been waiting for this. Yeah. What was it like?
So there's some memories in life where you have them very vivid, and some you don't. That's one of those memories that's quite clear in my mind, in the sense of, I think the first thing I was aware of was the change in everyone, that subtle change.
Oh, really?
Suddenly, we're not all these cocky gobshites anymore. Like, because you've got to have a little bit of ego in you to have a bit of oomph to go and do it, and we're instilled that. So we flew in from Bryce Norton, and I remember the lads were all like, you could see everyone was in a good mood. You can see the morale. Do you know what I mean? And you could just see it suddenly go really quiet. And some of those,
as you get closer to
everyone dealt with it very differently. There was guys that were completely blasé and just carried on as normal. People deal with things differently. I'm an observer, always been an observer. I remember just seeing the slight changes in people and going, okay, this is happening.
Were you really suited up in the plane?
Helmet. Yeah, you have to be, because we're flying into a war zone.
Yeah.
So I remember it felt like a normal plane. We're all there, but we're all in uniform. Put your helmets in the overhead locker. It felt very normal.
Actually,
kind of. I can't remember, but
like that type of thing.
Please put your rifles on safety.
It felt very much like a commercial airline until the point where, as we started to land closer, the red light come on, and we all have to put on our helmets and body armor and shut the blinds because of the RPG threat. Yeah. It's at that moment you feel it, and you go, wow, I'm here now. And I remember looking around, and it was, that feeling you get when you walk off the plane on holiday, you feel the heat and you smell the new atmosphere.
Exactly like that.
But that's what it felt like, but then it wasn't. And you look around, you see all the military planes, and you're straight into it, and you're like, okay, cool. Then it's just all systems go. Our job out there in Afghanistan, we were part of my regiment, we had a split BRF, which is Brigade Reconnaissance Formation, and the other split, which was Warthog Group. And if you want to know what a warthog looks like, similar.
So
to
yeah,
these.
if you're listening to the audio podcast, then you're not going to be able to see this. But if you're watching the visual one, then you'll see that behind us we've actually got a picture, and this is your regiment. These are the people that
these
you
are
were
my
with.
guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So like talk us through
That
it.
was
like,
our tour.
just a little bit. So obviously, like, so you know everyone here.
Yeah. So basically, we didn't get much. Our role whilst we were out in Afghanistan, our guys were
Warthog group.
So I was in the Warthog group, and our job was to, and I didn't realise it at the time, but this was around the time when troops were pulling out of Afghanistan. Do you remember that happening on the news? And we were closing down the camps. The guys that were closing down the camps were the logistics regiments and the engineers. And what happens when you're dismantling a camp? You become a threat very quickly. You become vulnerable. Everyone's going to attack you
because the Taliban, the Al Qaeda, they
know what they're doing.
The equipment, right?
Yeah. Well, and it was that case of we are withdrawing from Afghanistan. Are the Taliban going to let us leave, or are they going to give us a fight? Are they going to make us leave with a bloody nose? And I can tell you, they made us leave with a bloody nose with our group anyway. Because that was a messy day. But I will get there.
Yeah, of course.
Keeping you cliffhanger.
Yeah, this is a rest.
Stay tuned for next week.
Saving for the climax.
So,
with that role, we didn't actually get to stay in a one base. Forward operating bases, FOBs we called them. We stayed in many different ones because we continuously moving, and our role was to keep known enemy targets looking at us and not at them, so they can close down the camps. Bait, basically, you know.
Jesus.
And at that young age, I never knew. I was the lead call sign in my vehicle.
you're the tip of the spear.
Yeah, I was the one at the front in my troop.
Jesus, tough fucking job.
And I had the troop sergeant in the vehicle with me. I was a corporal, obviously. So, the fundamentals of that weren't great anyway. We went out on operations, quite a lot of operations. And
Sleeping in the desert.
Yeah, and they were like 1 to 2 week operations. And that's essentially, you're not in the safety of a forward operating base. You're not in the safety of a base. So we have to create our own safety, and we utilise the equipment we've got. We've got heavily armoured vehicles. So what we do is we put them in formations, normally in like a square. What we would call it is a desert box, nice simple one. You set up in the square, but obviously you've got a bomb threat as well. So it's not as simple as just setting up. You have to clear it as you're doing it as well.
Right.
And on the outside, we've got guys either corner of the vehicles looking out. So we've got a base inside. But the problem with that, if you've only got a handful of soldiers, you have to keep changing, and you don't get actually much sleep because it's your turn to look out whilst so it was very exhausting. You're probably getting like 5 hours of broken sleep, if that, and so the conditions in that sense was very tiring. The vehicles kept breaking.
Really?
We kept getting shot at here and there. The bomb threat was real. We were speaking about the history of Afghanistan. What the first thing we found when we were out in Afghanistan as an army was the sheer amount of Russian equipment left behind.
Really?
Like
Uncharted
fresh AKs.
minefields.
Really?
Do you know how many Russian bombs are still in Afghanistan, and there's still a threat to this day?
Really?
Yeah, I read about that. I read about the civilian casualties because of like IEDs and unexploded ordnance in Afghanistan. It's like fucking staggering.
Wow.
But and this is where I touch on the Taliban's skill as well. They were always, so we would, for example, we had metal detectors to detect metal bombs. They realised,
A hobby Johnny still has to this day.
there you go. they thought, hang on a minute, they've got a metal finding thing, so they started making their bombs out of plastic.
Yeah.
The metal ones weren't detecting it, and we had to learn the hard way and get blown up. You lose quite a few people, Some people lost legs, some people lost life. Fuckers. At least you're good at your job. Good soldiers, that's what you want, isn't it? But so it was always like we would solve something, then they would change it, then we'd have to change it again. So we went from the metal detector style to a piece of equipment that's like a metal detector, but can tell you, that gives you a noise if the ground's been disturbed and it's loose.
Yeah.
Can't remember what we called them now, but it was funny. They made like little turkey noises. They go, we're like, there's a bomb here. We did so much training, ground sign awareness training, where you're looking at the ground, you're looking for things, you know what to see. A lot of the times we didn't even need the
You just knew when there was one.
You could just tell. We was up in Yaksha, which was a known Taliban hotspot, and the ground up there
In Helmand.
a lot of the right, yeah, Helmand province. So
which is southern Afghanistan for those who don't know, it's the southern point of Afghanistan, and that's where like the majority of the Taliban fighters were at the time.
So these sort of hill areas, you know, everyone knows on the hills there's bombs, because what also hills good for? Observation points, looking
Defense
down on
as well.
villages. So if you've got a known Taliban hotspot and you've got loads of hills around it, the Taliban know the British love a hill and they're going to use that to set up. Right. So we also know that. So we knew the bomb threat was high.
Right.
To this point, we know the Taliban, Al Qaeda were essentially defeated in 2002. They re-emerged in 2005. And over the next 9 years, they've been sort of re-establishing themselves a little bit. They've been having... They've been going on like offensives and growing, and they've basically started using IEDs a lot, which are improvised explosive devices, and they're essentially just leaving them in the roads for British and American and coalition vehicles to go over or people to step on, and they're basically starting to, as obviously they're aware that the withdrawal of the coalition troops is happening, they're starting to ramp up the intensity of their attacks at the same time. So the Taliban footprint's expanding while the coalition footprint is decreasing, I guess, at that point. Was that fair to say?
Yeah.
There's a lot of wars fought in this fashion where you're one organised army, but your opponent is fighting using guerrilla tactics, which is essentially going off, coming in, fighting, laying down traps, running off again.
We've been used to conventional warfare for such a long time, and all of a sudden, you tell me what the Taliban look like. Afghanistan civilians have guns as well. You know, who's your enemy? What do they look like?
There are recorded events of the American armed forces going into villages and shooting civilians because they just don't know who the Taliban are. They don't know who the militias are. This is a classic thing with guerrilla warfare, where you just
Vietnam
get
is such a good example.
Viet Cong. They just go to My Lai, which is a massacre in Vietnam, where basically they went to a Viet Cong village and didn't know a Vietnamese village and didn't know who the Viet Cong were, and just started basically shooting all the civilians. Like, we'll kill all the men and women.
But that's a tactic, isn't it? It's a tactic. If you're a smaller force fighting an organised proper army, then that is the tactic to confuse them. If we pretend that we're the ordinary citizen, then how are they going to tell us apart? They have to kill everyone, and that's not only fucked morally, it's going to fuck with your head, but it's also so difficult to gauge, and that second of doubt might be the difference.
And it's interesting you say that, because it was known to us, the Taliban would target the youngest looking bloke in the section. They would try and kill someone around Christmas time because they knew it would affect the hearts and minds of people back in the UK. So they're very clever in the way they think, and because they're about making an impact. If you're a group,
that's terrorism, isn't it?
There you go. You know, so it was having those things in your mind as well. And like, I think I don't want to say what my biggest fear when I was in the war zone was, because I don't want to manifest it. But I guess it's being in a situation where you're taken away from your guys.
Right.
Without saying it, because I don't want to say it.
Isolated,
Yeah. And that was definitely what was going through my head when I got injured.
Yeah, so if you're happy to...
Story time.
Yeah, shall we delve into it? Talk us through the day. How did it begin? Like, what was the mission? Let's go through it.
Right, so take you back. So it was the 5th of March 2014 was the day that my life changed, essentially. And what was really weird, I'll give you the proper juicy details. What was really weird is I'm on a state of religion. Where do I stand with it? I'm open-minded. I don't believe anything as much as I disbelieve in it. And I remember we would always have these talks about religion, politics, often whilst looking at the stars in the evening. You know that sort of chat? The best sorts of chats.
It's straight vibes.
It's quite nice if you're not in the fucking war zone.
That probably adds to it, if anything.
But that's, you know... I remember being in Afghanistan, the country itself felt alive. I can't explain that, but that you could feel it. And there was always these sorts of conversations going on. It's quite nice, really. I love those conversations. And I remember sort of saying, I remember looking at, after this conversation with the lads, I went back, and the sky just seemed really orange that night. It looked beautiful. And I just went, if there's a God, give me a sign, right? The next morning...
Wow.
The next morning, he definitely gave me a sign. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. We were on an operation where we had to go into the village of Yakshaw, which was a known Taliban hotspot, and our job was to make sure that they were looking at us rather than them looking at the fob that was nearby. I think Lashtarai, I think it was. So we stayed there overnight. We drove up to the hills, which we know is squeaky bum time. Do you know what I mean? There's bombs everywhere.
How are you feeling at that point in time? Are you like actually shitting yourself?
Well, I remember with this operation particularly, when we refilled our vehicles and we left the camp, everyone knew this was going to be a big mission. It was very obvious. I remember there was arguments about it with hierarchy, and I remember seeing that and thinking,
that's not a good sign.
Yeah, and what was really bizarre about it, and I'll never forget it. This was the only operation we'd been on at this point where there was a priest as we were all driving out going like this.
Jesus
as we were
fucking
leaving.
Christ.
And I remember looking around at my troop sergeant and he went, and I was like, okay. And I got it at that moment that this is going to be bad. Like, this is going to be juicy. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, okay, well, there we go. And
Juicy is not the first one that comes to mind for this.
oh, juicy day. no, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you know?
of course.
And I'd already been out there about 6 months. About that, 5 months, 6 months. Christmas Day, New Year's, done that in Afghan. I was quite desensitized, been at this point. Never complacent, but you get where I was.
Your headspace was in that.
Even just throwing the body armor and helmet felt really heavy at the start. You're like, oh, now I was just throwing it over me like a feather. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We'd been there, done that. At the start of the tour, you're like this, looking at the top of your vehicle, and then you're just like that, like, fucking come on then, you bastard. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So we were at that stage. We're like, okay, let's go. Let's get this mission done. Let's have no deaths today. Let's the boys need to be safe. We've got a job to do. So I remember that the night before we were making our presence being known. The enemy are now looking at us. We're on the high ground. We know there's bomb threat. So far, we're all good. We've done good clearing skills. We've set up the camp. We set up the night before, ready for a planned dummy attack on the village in the morning. Our plan was to pretend to build a bridge with the engineers, and our job was to obviously protect him. So everyone's going, what are they building a bridge over there for? Because they don't want us having access into the Taliban hotspot, do they? Right. So that was our job. We wasn't going to build a bridge. We just wanted them to look at us. That soon became very hairy, as you can imagine. So I'm driving in, another day at the office. Jonny Holloway, invincible. I felt strong. I was in that stage in my life where I felt I could take on anything. Going along, me and my troop sergeant, we're waffling about stuff, probably talking about who's going to get the sausage and beans in a ration pack, that sort of stuff. And I remember we got to a point, this was the last day of our operation. After this, we were going to go back into a camp and get some hot food in our belly. Okay. We were like, come on, final push, let's go.
How long was this operation in total?
We was on I think it was a 2-week op, and we was on the last day of it.
Okay, yeah.
So at this point, I'm stinking. I haven't washed properly. you know what I mean?
Not as bad as you currently do.
I'm looking. I was looking.
Right, you're right.
I was looking rugged. I hadn't eaten too much. I remember looking really skinny back then. Let's get this done. Let's go home. I just, you're at that sort of mindset. And I remember I was driving along. The radio's going. You've got one team of communication in your right ear. You've got another team of communication in your left ear on different sort of radio. And then you've got your crew, which is me. So we're talking. So you've got a lot going on in your ears. I was driving at the time. I remember I'm continuously looking at the floor, making sure that nothing too dodgy looking. But like I said, sometimes it can be hard to see because it's not been touched in ages. It rains, the sun comes out, it rains, the sun comes out, the ground's just baked. It doesn't look like there's anything there. But little did we know that whilst we were there the night before, some sneaky little buggers came along and primed them all.
Yeah.
And so we're still trying to dodge them. We're hoping, at this point we're okay. But I'm the lead call sign. We set off. We start driving off. We make it, so we're sort of on one side. We make it a little bit further down the road. I remember steering, so I was facing the village. I could see it in front of me. I could see heads popping up and down for any minute now. This is going to happen.
You think?
And I remember my troop sergeant, he was like, yeah, Johnny, we're going to set up here this is a good start before we go down just to scout the area. And I was like, yeah, cool. Took me seatbelt off. It's like a harness, not like a normal seatbelt. I remember taking that off. And then I opened up my vehicle. I was about to get me Valen out, which is the metal detector type thing we were talking about.
Yeah.
Went to search the area, you do it quick. Sometimes, mainly you look, because you're in a metal vehicle, it's going to go off anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So you just kind of hope. I remember looking, yeah, cool, about to get in. He was, oh, for fuck's sake, Johnny. I was like, what? He was like, oh, the boss wants us to move again. Apparently this position ain't in again. I was like, oh, right, cool. Grabbed it back in, shut the door. I remember sat in, I was about to just go, and I thought, can't bother to put this harness back on. Right, like, literally, right? And I thought, okay, let's fucking do it. Put it on. Let's be sensible. I put it on. Wow. I didn't know at the time, but
that decision
saved your life.
it really did save my life. And then this is how sudden it goes, And then it was like, right, come on, fucking Johnny, let's move the vehicle. Let's get this fucking up down. Okay, cool. Right, I'm moving now. Da, 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 da. Bang!
Jesus.
Complete silence. That's how it. And confusion, just like I am now trying to talk about it. It was just so normal. All this noise going on. It was just a slight turn of the blast
itself.
The bomb itself was around the 60 to 80. I don't know. I hear different stories every time, but 60 to 80 kilograms is what it was said to be.
That's a fucking heavy,
fucking big bomb.
And you're in a. For those who can't see, these vehicles Johnny's in are enormous. And I think you told me when we were on the Traitors that you got thrown up, like, I don't know how many feet in the air. No, in the air.
So it was a 20-ton vehicle essentially. The first part of the vehicle, and it is 10 and the 10 altogether 20,
Yeah.
and it blew us 14 foot in the air.
Jesus
14
Christ. That's how
feet.
powerful this fucking payload
So
is. This IED.
so from my perspective, as we was going along, it was just like I didn't even hear the bang. It was so loud I didn't hear it. But there was boys in my regiment that was about 2 miles away, and they heard it. They saw the dust cloud, and they knew it was one of us.
And
these are my friends. These are my friends.
Yeah,
so then they're like, "Oh shit, one of our lads have been hit." And the vehicle behind me saw it. I remember speaking to him since, and he said when it went off, he was like, "They're dead. No way they survived." And the guy that was in the vehicle behind me was my major at the time. And he was the big boss, basically. He's not going to go in front of his.
Yeah.
That's just that's the way
That's
it
the
works.
army thing.
Yeah. And he said when he saw it go, he didn't want anyone to come to the vehicle because he was convinced we were just, his words, pink mist. In my vehicle, from my perspective, I remember like I said, we were talking, and then I remember just kind of not really registering it. I couldn't see anything. I kind of, in my head, I could hear a brief scream and a shout of we had the radios on. I had and I remember I was looking down, and the only thing I thought of at the time was, is my troop sergeant okay? Because if he's not okay, we've got a problem. First of all, and I remember hearing this noise. I'm trying to process what's happened. Now I could hear it. I'm like, what the fuck? I looked out. My door isn't there anymore. I'm just looking at this huge hole in the floor. Jesus. And I'm like, okay. I think I know what's happened there. I'm like, okay. Right, army, there's gunshots going off. Where am I? What am I doing? Like, I was so dazed because I had a huge bang to the head as well. But at this point, I'm looking around, the dust is settling. I remember the taste, just dust. I was covered in liquid.
Hell.
It was a horrible feeling, absolutely horrible feeling. I was so confused. And I remember turning around and go, okay, I need to do it. And I looked. Normally I would see my troop sergeant stood there and he'd pass me fags something. I looked, he wasn't there anymore, and I looked forward really quickly, and I thought, okay. And then I heard the screams and the shouts amongst the gunshot, and I was like, well, he's fucked. And I was like, okay, what about me? What's going on? And I could hear the gunshots going on, and I remember I had a pistol on my leg. That wasn't on my leg anymore. It was on the floor in the crater for some reason. I remember looking down at the crater, still trying to figure out what was going on. And I could see just fucking everything going off in this village. It was just the whole world had opened up on us. And I was facing them. So where my vehicle had blown, it put me sort of facing where the fire was coming from. My troop sergeant was blown out of the vehicle with the front bit of the vehicle, for those that can see. He came off in the air and it landed on him. He landed on the floor and it crushed a lot of his internal wind.
Jesus.
From the vehicle's behind's perspective, he saw the dust start to settle, and all of a sudden he saw my troop sergeant just sat there with this on him, and I thought, fucking how has he not been split in half? Because this thing is heavy.
Yeah.
That was his first
is he alive still?
luckily, he did survive.
Jesus
he did
fucking
survive.
Christ.
Yeah, I know. He wasn't due to make the flight back to the Afghanistan hospital, let alone back to UK. The major behind us, he jumped out the vehicle, saw what had happened, saw my troop sergeant laying wounded on the floor with part of the vehicle attached to him. So he ran out, managed to throw it off of him, which essentially saved his life because it was crushing him. And if he didn't do that, he would have died. So, you know, in another world, he could have run out and got blown up, and then the lads would have been like, fuck, we've got no one in charge. But luckily, that didn't happen. But that's why there's rules in place for these things. And, you know, the person I'm talking about, I have the utmost respect for, and, you know, they're a big person in my life. And
Still speak to him?
yeah, of course. It was, I think he's probably like Lieutenant Colonel now.
Oh, really?
Man,
Good on you, son.
that was quick, yeah. I would have been running the army faster. But
sorry, go on. You're facing the Taliban at this point. Like,
yeah. So the hole's next to me. The enemy threat's coming for that way. I just remember, and this is how bizarre it is. I remember thinking,
fly at you.
"You fucking got me! Stop shooting at me!" And I'm thinking they're trying to kill me, and that's when it really. I was like, they come, and I was like. And that's when I looked up and I could see people running a distance. I thought, where is everyone? Like, it's been a while. I felt like I'd been sat there for hours.
He's the first person to see the inside of your vehicle.
Essentially, yeah. So he said he then tried to look around to see where I was because he was convinced I was gone. And he just said he saw me, and I was like, oh, it was obviously. So when it went off, I'd smashed my head off the top of the vehicle, and we had a thermal imaging screen that hit me in the back. So it knocked me unconscious. God knows how I was out for, but it did cause me to have frontal lobe damage. So I was completely, you know, in my own little world. And he said he just looked, expecting to see just a mess of blood and what used to be of me. And I was just there like, with my thumbs up.
He must have felt so fucking relieved.
Yeah, he said it was like the funniest,
Jesus.
but like, you know.
as must you, right? Because you were literally thinking seconds ago, where is everyone?
Yeah, but he says, I don't remember that. So it's a bit patchy for me. But the relief for me was, I remember I started to digest the information more, and I'm starting to go, okay, I know what's going on, and I still was convinced that I'd kind of been forgotten about. People thought I was dead. I remember hearing guys calling things over the radio, and maybe my name wasn't mentioned, and I thought, okay, this isn't good. But and then they did, because of the initial, you know.
Yeah.
But when it did happen, I remember the shots being fired at me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to die. I'm going to get shot at.
Is the wall bulletproof though?
I'm looking. No, the door's gone. It's just me sat there, trapped in the vehicle with fucking like, hello.
Can you hear like the
Yeah, that's why I was like, I'm
Jesus.
going to get shot. I remember seeing pinging off the floor, and I thought,
and your mate
fucking
just
hell.
sprinted towards you?
No,
across
he
this-
didn't. He took control. He decided to go over to my troop sergeant and deal with him as a casualty. We're a team. We've got other blokes working with us. And he was like, right, we need someone to somehow get to Johnny, who's trapped in the vehicle. But do you know what the problem was? You know the bomb I hit?
Yeah.
There was about 6 or 7 others all around me.
Oh fuck!
And we didn't know that.
You ever seen a Hurt Locker?
Shit film.
Really?
Someone can't just pick
It won
up all those
it won an
fucking
Oscar.
things out of the ground like that. Do you know how heavy they are? And he's just like, woo.
I've seen some of them, some IEDs though, which is the thing that blew Johnny up, the 60-kilogram thing.
They're designed to take tanks out, basically.
That is insane, but like some of them can be really small. Like some of them, there's pictures in like the War Museum's archives of like an IED out of a Coke can.
Out of a Coke.
Out of a Coke can, yeah. Just wires hanging out of a Coke can, and that's obviously
designed to build.
I
It's
assume that's
so
more personnel,
easy
right?
to make an explosive.
And I presume that sort of Coke bottle is probably for a person more than a vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. The sort of things that were designed to take out heavy vehicles, they would normally use, like, you know, the big water containers and things like that.
What containers?
Water containers. You know, the big barrel? Like,
What's a
you fill
water
up-
container?
But do you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
big,
the
like,
huge,
and they would
circular
just
barrel.
fill that with shit. I felt very much like, fuck, I'm on my own. What's going to happen? What's going to be the end of me here? Am I going to get shot? Is someone going to come and grab me? What's going on here? It was terrifying. And I remember looking at my pistol. I was sort of like, in my head, I wanted to reach out and go, ah! I don't know. It was having a moment.
as you
I
would.
wanted to, they were shooting at me. Shoot back. Yeah. So I remember doing that, and my mate, suddenly, there was someone on top of the vehicle who was like, don't even fucking think about it. I was like, what? And then he was like, Johnny, where are you hurting? And as soon as he said that, I thought, oh, hang on a minute. I'm actually in quite a lot of pain here. And it wasn't until he said that.
Yeah, that you'd realised.
Then I felt everything. My whole entire left leg felt like a flaming, like it just felt on fire.
It's funny that because it wasn't there.
Yeah, but it felt.
I was wondering where
but,
you go with
but
that.
it was. That's what confused me. It really felt like it wasn't. It was there. It looked like it was there. But inside, the bones were, the shockwave of the explosion just and shattered every single bit of my bone and left it inside. And it was when he said that I could feel that. Do you know what I mean? And it's interesting how I didn't feel it until he said.
And that pain was just extraordinary.
Yeah, and it was the worst pain I've ever felt. Wouldn't recommend it.
No, I'm glad you recommended me not to. I was about to go out there and.
But it was so painful that you're in that state of shock, and then suddenly once I realised that I was pretty fucked, what was going on, and just the way he was looking at me, I was like, "What's going on with me?" Like, and I suddenly remember starting to panic a bit and going, "Okay, right, here we go." The firefight was kicking off. Guys were trying to clear bombs whilst being under fire. We had RPGs being fired at us. We had Dushkas being fired at us. Great big machine guns. It was fucking scary.
So you've been blown up, but this whole firefight is happening around. You're the lead vehicle.
We were ambushed, essentially.
Your vehicle's been blown up, but your whole team around you are just still engaged in a firefight while they're trying to get you out.
Yeah, and we're stuck on the top of this hill with bombs all around us.
Jesus.
It felt like it was forever for the boys to take me out of there. But that's because of the whole experience of it and being in so much pain. They were talking about getting
You were conscious the entire time?
in and out. So they were talking about getting me out of the vehicle. How are we going to get Johnny out? Because I was kind of trapped in it. Or they thought I was stuck in it. And I kind of was.
Like melded to it.
Yeah. What they were going to do is get like a harness around me and Chinook me out. And I remember hearing them saying this, right? This is where I knew I was a little bit with it.
Chinook being a
I was like,
helicopter.
No, you're fucking not. I was like, so we're being fired at by all sorts of fucking RPGs and things going off. It's like firework display, you know what I mean? And they want to have me swinging under a helicopter. Like, hello! I remember like, I can get out.
I'll walk it
I
off.
was like, no, I don't want it. Like, and the boys were trying to pull me out, and I managed, and they pulled me in the crater, the hole of where we were blown up, because that was the only bit of cover we had.
Handy bit of cover, yeah.
So I remember just laying in there, and everyone was trying to like sort my leg. And I was like, stop fucking touching my leg. It was so painful, and I was scared, like. And you could see all these bullets going off, and they were like, Johnny, get on the stretcher. I think they put loads of drugs in me at this point, because that's when I was like, gone. But this is where we had the vehicle, and then there was we're on the hill, and there was a huge gap of openness until the next vehicle. We had to use each vehicle, and we couldn't move any because of the threat of the bomb. Yeah. So we had to run from vehicle to vehicle every now and again, wait for the right moment, and run under fire. I can't run. So I'm thrown on this, and this for me was quite traumatic at the time, to the point, this is when I first knew mentally it affected me. Because I was put on a stretcher, and I'll fast forward quick, but I was put on that stretcher, and it wasn't a very fun experience. I kept feeling like I was going to fall off. I was being shot at. I remember looking around and seeing the bullets hitting the dust in front of me. I remember then looking up, my mates are going, and I'm just looking up, like, in my own little, like, in my own little world, like, this is a bad fucking day. You know what I mean? I was like, this is a bad day at the office. I'm probably going to die now, like, because I could see all these shots. And that to me, and just being on that stretcher was such a horrible experience, to the point where, fast forward, go in hospital, and I was like, can't go on, don't put me on a fucking stretcher. And that's when I knew something
had
right.
twisted, yeah.
Yeah, but what it was is so the guys had to run out, and as soon as they ran out from the vehicle, fired, fucking drop on the floor again, and I was like, fucking hell, what's left me? And then my mate come around dragging me, and I'm like, it's just so like carnage.
Chaotic, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Obviously, on a ground that's scattered with bombs, can you land a helicopter on it? No. And what did the helicopter say when we called for casualty evacuation?
Fuck that.
Fuck the fuck off unless you can find all those bombs. So we had another troop drive us, and then try and the plan was to get me in the back of the Warthog, threw me in the back of it, and then drive me to a more safer place that's been searched
already.
At this time, the boys are still stuck on that hill with my vehicle that's completely fucked, being shot at on the hill. I'm thrown in the back of the vehicle. Remember that as well because it was painful. I was in and out at that point. I remember one of the lads saying he was just looking at me and my eyes just closed and he was like, I thought you died there and then. I was like, fucking hell, really? I was like, well, sorry about that. I didn't mean to.
Sorry, just scared
Sorry,
you.
sorry, I was fucking dying.
And then I remember my mate like go, Johnny, and it was quite comforting to see his face. And then I could hear the helicopter and then I looked up and I could just see the helicopter blades. I remember sort of being thrown down. All of a sudden, I look down and my clothes are being cut off me. I'm looking and like around, fuck, like, do you know what I mean? And I just remember panicking, going, "Oh, get off me! I don't like this!" Like, oh, and then
You're in hospital at this point, or in
the back of the helicopter, and we're still getting shot at this point. They had to get me out quick as I can.
Yeah.
And the horriblest thing, the worst thing for me, was me being evacuated. Do you know why?
because your boy's still there.
They were still there, and they were there for 4 hours after I was flown out at that point. They were still there under fire.
So how did they get out? They eventually came back the same way, or how was their
eventually
retreat?
the firefight stopped.
They stopped shooting.
So it lasted a very long time. We had to get the vehicle out of her. I guess the Taliban's goal was we've just blown a vehicle up. We want them to leave that vehicle there, essentially. You know, any sort of motive.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a messy one, and I was aware that it was like, I remember being in hospital, but my main worry is my troop sergeant okay? The boys were like, don't worry about him, he's absolutely fine. I'm like, you're chatting shit. That's what we're taught to do. You know, you're not going to say, no, he's fucked.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I was worried about him, he was worried about me. I remember being in and out, and from the boys' perspective, they were, you know, it was messy at this point.
Heavy.
We were low on ammunition. We already got casualty. The morale's, you know, a lot of the young lads that looked up to me, they've seen me in my worst state, you know. And that's hard for me as well, because we're always, you know, especially as a lance corporal, you're taught to be a certain way, and you don't want the younger lads to see you, and you know. And same with my troop sergeant, I would never want to see him. And when I saw him like that, I saw him completely differently. I saw him as a human rather than a sergeant.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And these are all things that I had to learn at a young age.
So this was in 2014?
March
Back in
2014.
2014, and everyone thought all the war fighting had stopped there, but I fucking tell you it didn't. Whilst this contact was happening, my major they were on the radios. There was like, "Hello, Warhawk Group or whatever. This is Ghost Recon 15," and my major was like, "Hello, unknown call sign." And it turns out it was one of the bomber planes, and these are great big things, right? And they were like, do you need some air support? And he's like, no, don't fucking bomb the village. There's civilians there as well. Like, you know what I mean? We're fucked, but please don't take our village.
That is so American.
Yeah.
We can take that whole village down to rubble right now.
Okay, how about a show of force? And they were like, yeah, it's a show of force. And they said this contact was happening. Everyone's shooting at each other. All of a sudden you hear this. And everyone's like that, and then all of a sudden the bullets aren't coming towards each other anymore. Everyone just suddenly goes like that, and the Taliban this fucking huge bomber plane comes out of nowhere, like you could touch it, and they're ginormous.
Whoa.
And it just flies over everyone's head, and it was the first time.
Shit, that would shit you up, wouldn't it?
That's clever in a way, isn't it?
But it was the first time in it was the first time in a very long time, especially in Afghanistan, that a bomber had taken small arms fire. When I say small arms fire, I don't mean little guys.
It's not really can do much to that big bomber, is it?
My major was telling me the shots were like that, and then all of a sudden, the Taliban just went.
Up.
Well, that's such a better target for them.
Tell you what,
isn't it?
though, that even if you're saying that your mates would have been down on morale up to that point,
Seeing
because
that.
they see a huge American bomber in the air, and that must give you a bit more of like courage and thinking like, okay, well, at least that surely has scared the Taliban at least a little bit. Like that's got to help us in our favour.
Yeah, 100%, and it soon relayed that we were in stable positions ourselves.
Yeah,
I was flown back to the UK, and I was in Birmingham Hospital the next day with my troop sergeant. My troop sergeant was on life support machines and stuff. He was being worked on the flight on the way back. I was in and out of it as well with my brain injury. I was very unstable. I was having seizures. I was passing out. My leg was fucked. It was told that they couldn't operate on my leg, and it was mentioned about amputation essentially, and I had to make the choice myself in my head, because it was and I fought to keep it essentially all mangled, and I should never have done that. But it took me a long time to learn those lessons, and the minute it was completely taken away from me, I suddenly actually had power back again. I could do things again. I wasn't in pain.
So when was it that you ended up making the decision to have your leg amputated?
It was about just shy 2 years later, if that. So quite a long time. And in that time,
Did you think it was going to they could have done operate on it or healed it?
I knew from the first day that my leg was going to be gone. I was convinced it was completely gone, and I wouldn't have had a choice at all, essentially. But that wasn't the case. So when I saw it there, I was like, you fucking what, mate?
You fix it.
Yeah. It's here. What do you mean you want to cut it off? I'm just not, like, do you know what I mean? But I had to learn that myself, and mentally I prepared myself for it, essentially. I knew it was going to happen. I tried everything I could to keep it, and it didn't go that plan. But for me, the leg wasn't the hardest thing about being blown up. It was the mental aspect and the brain injury side of it, you know. I had to learn to walk and talk again. And my whole life changed. I was married at the time, and I remember my ex-wife saying I was like a completely different person, like just completely different personality. Even my voice was different. Like, to me, I felt completely. So for me, that was the hardest thing, because who am I? How can I be myself again? Like, and it was so I started this conversation of I felt invincible, I felt powerful. All of a sudden, I didn't.
Yeah.
And I felt very weak. And I felt like, what do I do now? I can't do anything anymore. And from being pumped full of that, you're a soldier, you can do this, and then suddenly going, I'm disabled now. Didn't see that one coming. Like, even though you know that you could be killed or dead, you still don't imagine a life with one leg, do you? Or, you know, so, you know, you're very aware that these things will happen, but I'd rather get injured or die doing the things I'm passionate about the most and the things I enjoy the most.
Like you said at the beginning, you have no regrets about anything that you've ever done. So
because it's created me, and you know, I said, you know, like if there's a God, give me a sign. All the things that I got after I got injured, the things that I wanted, things I never would have got if I didn't get blown up.
You're such an unbelievably inspiring person. Like you are. It's I tell people about when I first met Jonny on the Traitors, and I thought he was like just like a bit of a cocky Jack the Lad. And then like the more I got to know him, the more
I'm a sweetheart, mate.
Literally, the minute you came in the next day, you're like, yeah, I'm actually a fucking vet, and I had my leg blown up. I was like, this is just a complete different person to the very small image I painted, and I was like, this is like a incredibly deep individual who's had some real life experiences, and it's really empowering.
I've been transfixed to that story for the last half an hour. It's been unbelievable.
Really?
I just got I mean, I've never heard anything like it, or at least such a close account, and you explained it so vividly. I'm in awe. I genuinely am. I just think it's unbelievable. But the what you've taken from that experience is all positive. You know, these are negative things that are happening, but in reality, it doesn't matter. It's what you can take from it afterwards that matters, and you've taken it all with a complete stride, unbelievably so. And I just think it's like Zack says, outrageously inspiring and incredible. Seriously,
I think the most fundamental, the biggest thing I learned from all my experiences is, especially being the one that was injured, essentially, is seeing how it affects everyone else on a scale you wouldn't believe. I remember I had a friend that I wasn't talking to. Like, I thought, I haven't heard from him in a while. And one day he messaged me and said, Jonny, I didn't want to ring you. I was like, why? He's like, because I felt really guilty. I was like, what are you on about? I hadn't even thought about him at this point. He was like, well, I did some of the intel at the time, and I felt bad because I was like, dude, we all knew there was bombs there. Like, and it was on that level. And then it made me realise all my friends that saw me in that position, the helicopter crews, my mum and dad, it's traumatic things for them. And on a scale of, I saw how much the things I do and the things that happen to me can affect people on such a grand scale. And I didn't like that reality. No. I really didn't like that. I felt guilty myself for being blown up for a very long time because I caused so many mental health issues in other people. Do you know how mad that is to think like that? But I know
I don't think it's not uncommon.
It's
probably.
Not, and it's not fair at all that that's the case, but that's the reality, and it makes you realise that's the example of one person, one human, one soldier that's been blown up. You know, you then count the numbers on scales of wars like Afghanistan, and then you count the numbers on wars like World War II, and that's one individual story, but there's millions. And you just think all those millions of families and people. I always
wind the lads up, though. I say, I'm glad it was me that got blown up, because you lot are fucking pussies. You wouldn't be able to deal with it like I did.
I think you think of these soldiers as being like, directly accountable, responsible for the actions of the countries and the states and the players involved in them. But really at the heart of it is just like young men like you who have the right intentions or most cases, and they're really just they've got their own stories, their own emotions, and that's the kind of that's the fundamental core of all these wars and all these battles and everything we discuss here. So it's a good reminder of that. So at this time, this is 2014. The war in Afghanistan is it's winding down. Like we said before, the Allied troops and the coalition troops. Allied troops in World War II. The coalition troops are coming out of Afghanistan slowly. And in 2021, Biden gives a directive for all US troops to withdraw.
Which, by the way, although Biden was the one to
Trump's.
do it, Obama and Trump both had promised to take every US troop out of Afghanistan by a certain point in their term. Neither of them actually fulfilled it. It was Biden that ended up doing it only 3 years ago now.
Yeah. I'm not going to get into the deal itself with the Taliban and how this agreement came about withdrawing, but it was not a particularly good one. It kind of undermines all the experiences people like Johnny went through at the time. It really casts a bad soil on the whole experience. But after 2021, the coalition troops withdraw and the Taliban pretty much retake the entire country back within weeks, months, very quickly. They storm city after city, urban centre, and then you see the images coming out of the airport in, I think it was Kabul, where you see the big US Army aircrafts taking off with people clinging onto the wheels and trying to get out of there. But they know that if the Taliban get in, these people like interpreters in Afghan army, Afghan police, who have worked with the coalition forces this entire time, and they're basically kind of stuck there now in this shit that's been made for them. Yeah. But I guess that kind of turns me to you, Johnny, and seeing those images. You look fucking shocked.
It was a really hard time.
Seeing those images.
I've lost my leg in Afghanistan at the end of the day, and it made me feel a bit like, I feel like how the Americans felt with Vietnam, for example, or like. It was hard. I remember there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of emotion, and the way I learnt to deal with it, and I would say to any other person that served in Afghanistan, any veteran that served, is the only way you can look at it is it's not great what's happened. I know that the people I helped them experience a little bit of goodness in the stuff we did. We helped with humanitarian aid as well, and we made their life a little happier. They hated when the Taliban were around. They were like, please don't leave us, because the minute you drive to a different place, Taliban are going to come in and start doing what they do. And I know we kept some people to have a little bit of freedom in the time they had it, whereas they wouldn't. Yes, it was taken, but that's the only way I can see it in a positive way. Yeah. To try and help myself justify it. And when you think about it, that's why I joined the army, is to help people, not to help anyone else. It is individual people that are going through suffering, and that's what I did.
But yeah, I mean, that's the podcast for today. We just want to say a humongous thank you to you, Johnny, because that was unbelievable listening to those stories.
What a great round of applause that sounds like.
one clap. But no, seriously, mate, thank you so much. Because
awesome. You're welcome. I think it's important to address some of these subjects we've spoken about, and I am an open book. People always like, I wanted to ask you questions, but I don't want to offend you. But I will not be offended. If you want to ask me anything, I'm a real person. I will speak very real about things. I won't hide anything. And thank you for listening to me today.
It's incredible to listen, mate.
And it's lovely to see you all.
You've never met him.
I've never met him. Well, it's lovely to see you.
Now I'm jealous. Yeah, what the fuck? Nah, mate, it was brilliant. And it's so much fun to listen to some of the stories, some of the lighter stuff as well as some of the harsher stuff. So
yeah, it can get deep real quick.
Real quick.
Didn't feel like that to me. What a fun...
I could speak about the funniest stories. I could speak about the darkest stories, but we would be here.
We need more hours. We should have done like a 5-hour one.
Two-parter.
But anyway, so yeah, thank you so much, and we'll be back next time. I believe it's me that's doing the next one. I'm going to research the Cuban Missile Crisis because it's one of the most. I know. Look at Johnny's face. Look, it's one of the most incredibly important moments in human history. It's Cold War. It's nuclear Armageddon. It's all the buttons you want to press. JFK. Woo!
woo.
Come on, mate, JFK. Come on now.
JFK, woo.
Oh, mate. So that's what we're doing hopefully next time.
And guys, if you are enjoying the podcast, please remember to drop us a follow, leave us a review. It really helps for the algorithm. So,
Oh my God, we're doing that now.
It's
good for the
marketing,
algorithm.
I know. But
We're in
please,
that space.
Please do it, because it will help us reach more people out, and we can make better, longer
Content.
podcasts. Yeah, better content.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe some other stuff.
We get paid.
Do you want to go to a museum, a war museum?
Yeah, but right now let's go to the pub because this beer's hit the spot.
I know, it's literally
Let's do
finished. All right, cheers,
See you
guys.
later.